Manawatu-Wanganui is a region in the lower half of the North Island of New Zealand, whose main population centres are the cities of Palmerston North and Whanganui. It is administered by the Manawatu-Wanganui Regional Council, which for trading purposes is known as Horizons Regional Council. Government. The region covers all or part of 10 territorial authority areas. Parts of 5 of these are covered by 5 other regions of New Zealand, the most of any region. In descending order of land area, the territorial authority districts are Ruapehu, the major parts of Tararua and Rangitiki'i, Manawatu-Wanganui, Horowhenua, small parts of Stratford, Waitomo and Taupo. The largest city is Palmerston North, with a population of 85,300. It is the only territorial authority in the region to be administered by a city council. The governing body of the regional council consists of 12 councillors from 6 constituencies across the region, elected by the public. From the north, Ruapehu, Wanganui, Manawatu, Rangitiki'i, Palmerston North, Horowhenua, Kaironga, Tararua. It sits in Palmerston North. It has the responsibility for managing natural and physical resources, providing flood protection and monitoring environmental problems and fresh air, clean water, productive land and natural ecosystems. It is also responsible for public transport. Geography. The region is dominated and defined by 2 significant river catchments, the Wanganui and the Manawatu. The Wanganui River, in the northwest, is the longest navigable river in New Zealand. The river was extremely important to early Maori as it was the southern link in a chain of waterways that spanned almost 2/3 of the North Island. It was one of the chief areas of Maori settlement, with its easily fortified cliffs and ample food supplies. Legends emphasize the importance of the river, and it remains sacred to Wanganui iwi. Maori along the coast and lowland plains grew kumara and other crops. The Manawatu River runs across the center of the region, from rolling hill country in the east to the fertile Manawatu Plains in the west. The main city of Palmerston North is located on these plains, and is an important service city for the southern North Island as a whole. This river is unusual in that it passes from hill country to plains through a gorge cut into much higher country, an indication that the hills have risen since the river formed. To the southeast, a further, more sparsely populated area lies between the sources of the Manawatu River and the Pacific coast. This area, often historically connected with both the Hawke's Bay region to the north and the Wairarapa to the south, was historically simply known as Bush, a name which still survives in some businesses and organizations, most notably in the name of the Wairarapa Bush Rugby Football Union. The 2 river catchments have very different natures. While the open Manawatu Plains became more densely settled by Europeans, inland Ruapehu, Rangitiki'i and Wanganui remained more Maori-dominated, remote and independent, and is still heavily forested. As late as the 1950s, the Wanganui River remained a river of mystery. Since then, exploitation of the river's commercial potential has opened up the area, often causing friction with local Maori, who have long-standing grievances. Manawatu-Wanganui as a whole is one of the most important pastoral areas in New Zealand. Its status recognized when the government opened the Massey Agricultural College in the 1920s. Much of Manawatu-Wanganui was fertile and bush-covered when Europeans arrived and developed the area as a source of timber. Sawmilling and flax milling dominated the 19th century, followed by an influx of sheep farmers who exploited the newly cleared ground. Deforestation, burn-offs of timber and scrub, and large-scale drainage combined with overgrazing resulted in considerable environmental degradation. In the early 1900s, authorities realized that careful management was needed to maintain this important agricultural area. Topography: Manawatu-Wanganui takes up a large proportion of the lower half of the North Island. It is the second largest local government region in the North Island and the sixth largest in New Zealand, totaling 22,215 square kilometers. The region stretches from north of Taumarunui to south of Leven on the west coast, and across to the east coast from Cape Turnagain to Ofonga. It borders the Waikato, Taranaki, Hawke's Bay and Wellington regions and includes river catchment areas that run from the volcanic plateau to the sea. The Pacific Ocean is the eastern boundary and the Ruahine Ranges form a natural boundary with Hawke's Bay. The area includes a variety of landscape formations. Districts close to the volcanic plateau are higher and more rugged, often subject to harsh temperatures in winter. The Manawatu district has a much gentler topography, consisting mainly of the flat, tree-studded Manawatu plains that run between the ranges and the sea. The land was under the sea till about 500,000 years ago and still has a very thick layer of marine sediment, which is about 5 or 6 million years old. A block faulting system underneath the thick sediment has raised a series of domes and gentle depressions. These structures can provide natural storage areas for oil, and some of the Manawatu domes have been drilled. The domes have shaped the course of the Manawatu River, giving it a meandering path which, uniquely among New Zealand rivers, begins close to the east coast and exits on the west coast. The Manawatu River begins just inside the Hawke's Bay region, then flows through a deep gorge to the Manawatu Plains before exiting in the Tasman Sea. The river is also unique in New Zealand in that this gorge is a water gap through recently uplifted rock, causing the river to flow from relatively low-lying land along an eroded course through higher terrain. The Wanganui district is more rugged, with canyon-like valleys and gorges carved out of the soft rock by rivers and ocean waves. The region includes a series of mountain ranges, notably the Tararua and the Ruahine ranges, and the three major active volcanoes of the North Island. Mount Ruapehu at 2,797 meters is the tallest mountain in the North Island. Nauruhoi 2,291 meters and Tongariro 1,968 meters. During the last 100 years, Ruapehu has experienced 6 significant eruptions, and last erupted in 1995 and 1996. 3 major rivers divide the region: the Wanganui, Manawatu and Rangitikei. The Wanganui is the second longest river and has the second largest catchment in the North Island, draining most of the inland region west of Lake Taupo. There are few roads in this area, which contains some of the largest surviving areas of native bush in the North Island. Soil and climate. Soils are productive with the addition of fertilizer. In the Manawatu and Horowhenua districts, there are sandy soils and swampy hollows around the coast with loess-covered terraces and river flats. Inland, these river flats and swamp areas contain fertile alluvial and organic soils. On the drier terraces inland, yellow-grey earths predominate. The flat or more fertile soils suit intensive sheep farming and cropping, while the hill country of Rangitikei favors semi-intensive sheep and beef farming. Areas close to the volcanic plateau consist largely of pumice soils which lack some essential trace elements, but within the region much of this land is occupied by national parks. The region has a comparatively mild climate with greater climatic extremes inland. Chateau Tongariro experienced the lowest temperature recorded in the North Island, falling to -13.6 degrees Celsius on the 7th of July 1937. In summer the region is warm, with a maximum midsummer daily average of between 20.1 and 22.9 degrees Celsius. Sunshine hours approximate the national average for much of the region, but Palmerston North is defined as cloudy with an average of 1,725 sunshine hours. In the winter the minimum midwinter daily average for coastal areas is 4.0 to 7.9 degrees Celsius, while inland areas are considerably colder. Waiouru has a minimum midwinter daily average of 0.1 degrees Celsius. Rainfall on the plains is slightly below average, with Palmerston North receiving 960 mm, while the rest of the region receives the New Zealand average rainfall of 1,000 to 2,000 mm. Conservation and parks. The region contains areas of great ecological significance, reflected in the designation of approximately a seventh of its land area as part of the nation's conservation estate. Tongariro National Park is the largest park in the region and is the oldest national park in the country, established in 1887. The volcanoes Tongariro, Ruapehu and Nauruhoi are sacred to Maori and were given to the nation by Te Heuheutukino Paramount Chief of Ngāti Tūwhare Toa. They form the nucleus of the park, which is designated a World Heritage Area. Wanganui National Park is slightly smaller and was established 99 years later when a series of reserves were incorporated into one area and given national park status. There are two state forest parks in the rugged, bush-clad Ruahine and Tararua ranges. The four parks offer skiing, tramping, jet boating and whitewater rafting and the opportunity to appreciate the environment. The Regional Council, responsible for managing natural and physical resources, provides flood protection and monitors environmental problems such as pest infestation and pollution. Invasive plant pests such as African feathergrass, goat's rue and nodding thistle pose a threat to pasture land in this heavily agricultural-dependent region, and the Council has instituted control campaigns. The Council has also instituted animal pest control programs. Possums are perceived as the major animal pest since they damage native forests and endanger cattle production through the spread of bovine tuberculosis. Our eradication programs also concentrate on rabbits, rooks and feral goats, while other exotic species such as palmer wallaby, wasps, ferrets, stoats and weasels are a source of concern. People. The region had a usually resident population of 222,423 people at the 2006 census, the fifth largest population in New Zealand. It has a lower than average population density, 10.3 people per square kilometre, compared with 13.1 for New Zealand. Between the 2001 and 2006 censuses, the population rose by 1.6%, or 3,477 people. There are two major urban areas. Palmerston North, with a resident population of 85,300, expanded as an educational centre and a supply centre for the surrounding rural hinterland. It became a city in 1930. The other major urban area is Wanganui, with an estimated resident population of 39,400. Other urban centres include Leven, Fielding, Danavurka, Taumarunui, Foxton, and Martin. The region also includes the smaller towns of Bulls, Oakuni, Waiouru, Raratihi, Taihape, Woodville, Pahiatu, Eketahuna, Ashurst, Foxton Beach, Tarakina, Sanson, Shannon and Manawatu. City life does not dominate, as half the population live outside a large urban area, over a third in small towns or rural areas. While manufacturing has become an important part of the economy, most businesses are agriculturally based and agriculture remains the linchpin. The dominance of agriculture, combined with the relatively small scale of most urban areas, gives a rural quality to the region, quite distinct from the neighbouring Wellington region. The rugged interior has become one of the main training areas for the New Zealand Defence Force, which maintain 3 bases in the region: RNZAF Base Oakia, Linton Military Camp and Waiaura Military Camp. Cities and towns history. Pre-1769 approximately 3% of Maori lived in the Wanganui Basin and 8% on the Taranaki coast. Coastal Maori garden and gather food, but life for Maori further inland is more difficult, relying on hunting and gathering. 1820–40 Ngāti Toa and Teatia were iwi displaced local iwi from the lands. 1830 Te Rauparaha lay siege to Putiki Pa in retaliation for an attack on Kapiti Island, sacking the pa and killing its inhabitants. 1831 European traders arrive in the Wanganui area, led by Joro, supposedly a dealer in preserved heads. A dispute with local Maori leads to the death of 3 of his party and his own head is cut off and preserved. 1840 Jerningham Wakefield purchases 40,000 acres of land, under dubious circumstances, for the New Zealand Company, including the town site for Petra. The first European settlers start arriving in Petra. 1842 to the first organized European settlers in Horowhenua arrive at Paiaka. 1847 in July the Battle of St. John's Wood occurs when 400 Maori clash with an equal force of British regulars. 1848 the Crown purchases Wanganui, 80,000 acres, 8,000 acres of which are supposed to be set aside as a reserve. 1855 Paiaka settlers move closer to the coast at Foxton, which becomes a port handling flax, timber and agricultural produce. 1856 the Wanganui Chronicle is first published. 1860s Scandinavians settle in the Tararua district, later founding Eketahuna, Danaverka and northward. 1865 a battle ensues between the Hauhau adherents, who want to expel the Pakeha at Wanganui, and the Maori of the lower river. 1866 Palmerston North is founded. It is surrounded by forests, with the Manawatu River serving as its only link with the port of Foxton and the outside world. 1870s the bush is gradually felled and the Manawatu opened up for European farms and settlement. Former Danish Prime Minister, Bishop Ditlev Gotthard Munrad, organizes a settlement of Danes near Awapuni. 1871 the first sawmill is established at Palmerston North. 1872 Wanganui becomes a borough. 1875 the Manawatu Times is published for the first time at Palmerston North. 1876 a railway opens between Foxton and Palmerston North via Longburn, later named the Foxton Branch. Wellington Province abolished. 1877 Palmerston North becomes a borough. 1878 a railway line opens between Palmerston North and Wanganui. The first portion later became part of the North Island Main Trunk Railway, between Aramoa and Wanganui, the Wanganui Branch, and the rest part of the Martin-New Plymouth Line. 1884 the Sanson Tramway, built and operated by the Manawatu County Council, opens to Sanson, New Zealand from the Foxton Branch at Imatangi. 1885 Mother Mary Joseph Orbit starts her community of the Daughters of Our Lady of Compassionate Jerusalem, founding a home for Maori orphans, the elderly and infirm. The private Castle Cliff Railway opens between Wanganui and Castle Cliff. 1886. The Wellington and Manawatu Railway opens between Wellington and Longbourn Railway, superseding the Foxton link and ensuring Palmerston North's growth. 1889. Leven is founded because of the construction of Wellington and Manawatu Railway. 1908. The North Island main trunk reaches Taumarunui and thence Auckland, opening up the inland districts for development. 1906. Leven becomes a borough. 1924. Wanganui becomes a city. 1930. Palmerston North becomes a city. 1934. A major earthquake measuring 7.6 on the Richter scale strikes near Pahiatua and causes widespread damage from Horongahout to Castle Point. 1939. Oakia Air Force Station commences operations. 1945. The Sanson Tramway closes. 1953. New Zealand's worst rail disaster occurs at Tangiwai on the North Island main trunk, as the railway bridge collapses because of a lava flow from the crater lake on Mount Ruapehu. A train with Christmas holiday makers plunges into the flood, killing 151 people. 1956. The private railway between Wanganui and Castle Cliff is purchased by the government and incorporated into the National Railway network as the Castle Cliff branch. 1959. The Foxton Branch Railway closes. 1963. Massey University is formed by a merger of a branch of Victoria University with Massey Agricultural College. 1970. Famous New Zealand poet James K. Baxter sets up the commune at Jerusalem. 1991. In formal recognition of its original name, the government renames the Wanganui River the Wanganui River. 1995. Occupation of Mautoa Gardens in protest at the slowness of the Waitangi Tribunal claim settlement process and loss of control of the Wanganui River. 1995–96. A series of small eruptions occurs on Mount Ruapehu, throwing ash over a wide area. 2004. Sustained heavy rain in February caused the region's worst flooding in over 100 years. Economy. The sub-national GDP of Manawatu-Wanganui was estimated at $5.594 billion in 2003, 4% of New Zealand's national GDP. Business agriculture dominates the economy. A higher-than-average proportion of businesses were engaged in the agriculture, forestry and fishing industries, 6.3% compared with 4.4% nationally. Businesses engaged in retail trade were dominant numerically. In 1997 there were 2,300 businesses employing a total of 10,380 full-time equivalents. The percentage of businesses engaged in manufacturing was slightly higher than the national average, and manufacturing employed the greatest number of people. Energy. Unlike its neighbor Taranaki, Manawatu-Wanganui has not been a major producer of energy or minerals. Some new power schemes are operating, including the Southern Hemisphere's largest collection of wind farms, with 194 installed turbines and more planned. Agriculture. The region is known for its strong agricultural base, which prompted the establishment of an agricultural college there in the 1920s. The government wanted to promote scientific farming and established colleges in two of the most important farming areas, Canterbury and the Manawatu. Research by members of the college into animal genetics in the 1930s led to the development of new breeds of sheep, the Drysdale and the Perrindale, which became commercially significant after World War II. Agriculture dominates land use, although there are areas of forestry and horticulture. Soils and climate favor pastoral farming. There were 6,344 farm holdings on the 30th of June 1996, which was almost a tenth of all farm holdings in New Zealand. Farming occupied 72.5% of land, which was much higher than the national average of 60.1%. Approximately 80% of this land was used for agricultural purposes. In the Manawatu-Wanganui and Tararua districts, this percentage rose to over 90% of total land. The region is one of the most important areas of pastoral farming in New Zealand. It had 7,216,177 sheep, the largest number of sheep in the North Island and the fourth highest figure in the country behind Canterbury, Southland and Otago. The region also produces a significant proportion of vegetables in the North Island and is particularly noted for its abundant potato crop. Barley, which is used for the manufacture of stock feed and for malting, is grown. The region produces the largest quantities of barley in the North Island, providing 10% of the national refined crop of 302,804 tons in 1995. Forestry. The region is one of the most significant forestry areas in the southern North Island. The predominant soil type, yellow-brown earths, when enhanced by the use of fertilizers, is very suitable for forestry. Forestry has a long history in the Manawatu since Palmerston North developed as a sawmilling town, and the region's initial prosperity depended on heavy exploitation of native timbers. But land use practices inhibited the long-term viability of this indigenous forestry industry. Severe burn-offs destroyed large areas of native forest and subsequent overgrazing affected the soils. Forestry largely disappeared until the early 20th century. In an attempt to combat erosion problems in sandy soils, the government planted forests in the Foxton, Leven area in the early 20th century. Inland forests were planted later. Some private native forest has been set aside for sustainable logging, but most forestry depends on exotic plantings. Tourism. For the 8 quarters between September 1996 and June 1998, the region averaged 4.1% of total guest nights in New Zealand. This was close behind Wellington at 6.7% and greater than Hawke's Bay, which averaged 3.1%. Occupancy rates, at 20.1%, were the fourth lowest in the country for the June 1998 quarter. Rates for the city of Palmerston North were significantly higher than the national average, whereas districts such as Ruapehu are far more seasonal, with fairly low occupancy rates except in the peak ski season. Transport. State Highway 1, the main highway, and the North Island Main Trunk Railway, which both link Auckland and Wellington, run through the region. The Palmerston North Gisborne Line and State Highway 3 follow the Manawatu Gorge, linking the region with Hawke's Bay. The Martin-New Plymouth Line provides a railway link with Taranaki, and from this line the short Wanganui branch runs to Wanganui. Road and rail transport give the region's exporters easy access to ports. The region has approximately 16% of the North Island's road length. There are 8,732 kilometers of road, of which 2/3 are sealed. Approximately 12% of roads are classified as urban and 3/4 as rural, with almost half of the rural roads being unsealed. With 945.9 kilometers, the region has the second highest length of state highways in the North Island, after Waikato.